Hey, it's Pete. Welcome back to Question Christ. And today we're going to go into the second supposed contradiction in this video that I'm analyzing. You'll see the link in the link box over there. And just again, some background. Someone who is exploring Christianity sent me this video because they said this is a perfect example of some of the contradictions, supposed contradictions that hold this person back from trying to explore Christianity further. So without further ado, we're going to go into number 2. The second claim of contradiction that is made by this video maker is also in Genesis. The first one we did was in Genesis. He states the following. In Genesis chapter 10, there were many languages before the Tower of Babel. In Genesis chapter 11, there was only one. Okay, so let's look at this a little more closely. If you look at what comes before Genesis 10, you see in chapter 9 that the story of Noah is ending. The end of chapter 9 is actually the end of Noah's life. So chapter 10 then describes the descendants of Noah. And since his descendants populated the earth because they were the only ones who survived the flood, it explains which groups of people come from which descendants. This is why it is called the Table of Nations. This is a perfect place to put this list of descendants since Noah's story is now over. Then in chapter 11, the story continues with the story of Babel, where God takes the people of the world who all lived in one area and had one language and scatters them throughout the earth and gives them many different languages. The video maker tries to say that the list of Noah's descendants, including the description of their different geographical locations and their different languages over many generations, is contradictory to the account in chapter 11. Where it clearly says that there was only one language. But what the video maker fails to realize is that it is not intended that all these people groups and languages mentioned in chapter 10 come before the Tower of Babel story. How do we know this? If you look in chapter 10, close to the end of the list of descendants in verse 25, it says the following. Eber had 2 sons. One was named Peleg, for during his days the earth was divided. What division is this text talking of? The division of all the peoples after the Tower of Babel. You see this described in Genesis chapter 11, verse 9. Therefore its name is called Babylon, for there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Division in location, division in language, not the division of a tribe or a family, but of the entire earth. Then at the end of chapter 11, we have the genealogy of Abram, who will soon become Abraham, and how he came from Noah's son Shem. In verses 10 through 16, the text describes hundreds of years between the flood and the birth of Peleg. In verse 16, Peleg is again mentioned. It is clear that hundreds of years came between the flood and the birth of Peleg. Though I know there are those who have issues with the long lifespans described in this part of the Bible, that concern does not affect what the text is describing. To sum up, at the end of Noah's life in chapter 9, his descendants are detailed in chapter 10. This list explains the people groups that came from his descendants. These lists of descendants are called the Table of Nations, and it describes very clearly thousands of years and many, many generations. One of these descendants towards the end of the list is named Peleg and is described as living when the earth was divided. Now, what would have caused this and when did this event happen? Well, the text does not leave you hanging because it explains right in the next chapter with the Tower of Babel story. So when you look and you carefully read this text and put all these elements together, there's clearly no contradiction.